Hey, how's it going, everyone? It's Chow here, and today we are going to talk a little bit about feedback systems as well as homeostasis, so let's get started. Okay, so in the most general of terms, homeostasis is just this maintenance of a stable internal environment. And we have to maintain this stable internal environment in order for our cells, our tissues, our body to function properly. And this maintenance often involves the transportation of nutrients and waste, as well as maintenance of concentrations of, for instance, ions, maintenance of circulation patterns, as well as energy storage and processing of information. So in order to allow our bodies to function properly, we have to maintain these things over here, and that allows for stability. So we have all these feedback systems that allow our bodies to basically maintain itself and be able to function even in shifts in the environment. Of course, as mentioned, these shifts can cause challenges to homeostasis. So the external environment, a change in temperature, can often potentially affect the stability of the body, the stability of the system. We often also have metabolic processes of cells, right, that can create, for instance, waste products like ammonia or maybe carbon dioxide that can also feed back and affect our body homeostatically. So oftentimes we have to maintain that homeostasis by transportation again and maintenance of these ion concentrations, etc. And of course, in order to do so, we need to have feedback systems to kind of understand what is going on within us. So when we're looking at a system, right, and we're trying to maintain it, oftentimes for at least mammals and humans, we have this maintenance that's controlled by both the nervous system as well as the endocrine system. So there are a couple of things that we as a human have to do kind of involuntarily to maintain that homeostasis. So the first thing is we have to make a set point, which is just basically the ideal level within a system, the reference point. So for instance, a specific temperature, a specific pH. We need feedback information. So we're looking at the current level within a system, and then we're comparing it to that set point. Of course, we also need an error signal within our body, because that error signal is then going to tell us that difference, right? That difference between the original set point as well as that feedback information. So these three things can contribute to one another in order for us as the organism to allow that maintenance of homeostasis. So the nervous system provides the feedback information, generally speaking, and then the endocrine system will try to respond, right, to that error signal and then restore homeostasis if it is perturbed. Now, in order to maintain that homeostasis, we need regulation. More specifically, a physiological system, a balancing mechanism that allows for that maintenance. So in order to maintain, right, that stability within our cell, we need regulation. So we have regulatory systems which basically send certain hormonal or neural signals to control systems. And then at the very end, we need some kind of an effector to cause a change that basically can maybe push back the system towards a certain equilibrium in order to maintain what is the most ideal scenario. So if we're looking at this chart over here, this is something that is pretty good at explaining what these regulatory systems are. So we have certain types of stimuli that are affecting the body, and this is going to cause a change in a certain variable, maybe like pH. We're going to need a receptor that's going to detect that change, maybe that change in pH. And then eventually we need an afferent pathway over here that's going to take that information from the receptor and then bring it to the control center. So maybe through an action potential or something like that. So we need an input to the control center. The control center then processes the information, and then ultimately we have some kind of an output through an efferent pathway out of the control center. For instance, if this central nervous system over here, it has some kind of an efferent pathway that's pushing out, and that output, which is just information sent along the efferent pathway to, in this case, the effector, that's going to allow for some kind of a change. So ultimately, we have a stimulus. It has to be received. It has to be input into the control center. that control center has to process it, and then it's going to allow for an output through an efferent pathway until it reaches an effector. And then the effector ultimately can therefore allow for mediation or attenuation. And that effector ultimately is going to feed back, right, to reduce the stimulus or the effect of the stimulus, and therefore try to return the body to a more stable and or maybe more balanced level, as it's shown over here. So that's the whole concept of the physiological system. But the one key thing, of course, is feedback. So if we're looking at feedback themselves, we have basically two main groups. The first type of feedback is negative feedback. So negative feedback is sometimes thought of as a more inhibitory type of feedback, where basically the feedback corrects the air signal and tries to turn the system down. So you can think of it as sort of an inhibitory effect. Whereas we also have positive feedback, which actually amplifies the response. And the amplification of the response will ultimately turn the system up. And this is sometimes thought of as enhancement. So negative feedback is going to be more of an inhibitory effect, a decrease, a turning down effect. And then, of course, positive feedback, which is an amplification or an enhancement or turning up of the effect. And then ultimately, in order to separate feedback, we also have sort of feed-forward system. So instead of waiting for the response and then getting that response, that ultimate product, to kind of feed back to the original stimulus and maybe try to attenuate it in order to get the system back homeostatically and maintain that stability, we also have feed-forward information, which basically is internal changes that occur within the body in anticipation for future events. So if there's some kind of a change in the environment, there might be something within the body that's internally kicking up in order to anticipate that shift, that major shift in that particular change. So feed-forward information is really different than feedback from the fact that it's predicting, it's anticipating something that has yet to happen. Whereas with feedback, you're taking something that's already happened and then using whatever's happened to kind of come back and affect the stimulus. So that's how the body maintains homeostasis, through these concepts of physiological systems, inputs, effectors, as well as feedback.